He walked out the way Steve Harvey always walks out, like a man who has personally negotiated a peace treaty with the universe and is enjoying the results. The smile arrived first. That enormous, specific, weaponized smile that had become one of the most recognizable faces in American entertainment. The smile that said everything was going to be fine, that the room was safe, that whatever happened next was going to be worth your time. He came through the late show curtain with the ease of a man who had been making rooms feel better since before making rooms feel better was his profession. Acknowledged the applause with that signature combination of gratitude and inevitability, and settled into the guest chair like a man taking his rightful place in a world he had helped build. Steve Harvey at 67 was a different thing than Steve Harvey at 37, bigger in every sense, more settled, more certain, carrying the accumulated weight of a life that had gone from sleeping in his car to hosting the most watched game show in America, from stand-up clubs nobody remembered to stages nobody could forget. He had been through things. He wore them not as damage but as evidence that the thing he always said was true, that your story wasn't over until it was over, that the bottom was just a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else. Stephen greeted him warmly. The band played, and for the first several minutes everything was exactly what anyone watching expected: warm, funny, expansive. Steve at full capacity, which was a considerable thing. They talked about the new project, about the business empire, about what it meant to still be building things at an age when most people were thinking about slowing down. Steve was generous and funny and entirely present, giving the conversation everything it asked for with that particular Harvey combination of wisdom and humor that made everything feel both profound and accessible. He was completely in control. And then Stephen set down his note cards. "Steve," he said, "I want to ask you about your father." Something shifted, not dramatically. Steve Harvey had too much control for drama, but something shifted. The smile stayed, but the quality of it changed, the way a room changes when the light source moves. Something behind the eyes became more private, more careful, more real. "All right," Steve said quietly. "His name was Jesse," Stephen said. "Jesse B. Harvey," Steve confirmed. "Born in Welch, West Virginia, worked in the steel mills his whole life." "Tell me about him," Stephen said. Steve looked at Stephen for a moment. Then he looked at his hands, those large, expressive hands that had gestured their way through 30 years of television, that had held microphones and game show cards, and the hands of contestants who had just won or lost something that mattered. He looked at his hands, and something passed across his face that had nothing to do with television. "My father was the strongest man I ever knew," he said. "And I don't mean strong the way people mean it when they're trying to pay someone a compliment. I mean physically, constitutionally, fundamentally strong. The man worked in a steel mill for decades. He went to work in the dark and came home in the dark, and he never, not once, not one single time that I can remember, complained about it. He just went, every day. Because that's what the family needed, and he was the one who was going to provide it." Stephen nodded. "I grew up watching that," Steve continued. "Watching a man go to a job that used his body completely, that left him exhausted every single night, and do it without complaint, without self-pity, without ever suggesting that he deserved anything different. And as a kid, that shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. The work ethic, the refusal to quit, the idea that you show up regardless of how you feel because other people are depending on you." He paused, but it also broke my heart a little. "Because I could see what it cost him, I could see the toll of it, and I made myself a promise when I was very young." "What was the promise?" Stephen asked. Steve was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has weight that you can feel in your chest when you're sitting close enough to someone who is carrying something. "I promised myself that one day, if I ever made it, if whatever crazy dream I had for my life ever became real, I was going to get my father out of that mill. I was going to give him a life that didn't cost him his body. I was going to make enough money that Jesse B. Harvey never had to go to work in the dark again." He paused. "And I kept that promise," Steve said. "That's the part of the story I want people to understand. I kept it. When the money came, when the career finally turned and things started working, one of the first things I did was go to my father and say, 'You're done, you don't have to go back, I've got you.'" He stopped. And the look on his face when I told him that, his voice caught slightly. "I've hosted hundreds of hours of television. I've been in rooms full of people experiencing the best moments of their lives. And I have never seen anything that matched the look on my father's face when I told him he didn't have to go back to that mill." The studio was very quiet. "What happened then?" Stephen asked softly. I set him up, Steve said. Nice house, everything he needed, everything he deserved after a lifetime of giving everything he had so the rest of us could have something. And he moved in and he was happy, genuinely happy. He'd sit in this chair, this particular armchair in the living room, and he'd watch his programs and he'd drink his coffee and he'd just rest. For the first time in his life, he just rested. And watching that, Steve stopped. Watching my father rest was one of the greatest things I have ever witnessed. The first tear came then, quiet and unhurried, sitting on Steve Harvey's face without apology or performance. He passed a few months later, Steve said. He didn't get long. After a lifetime of work, after I finally got him somewhere he could breathe, he didn't get long to breathe it. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Stephen stood up from behind his desk without announcement and walked around to sit on the edge of it, facing Steve directly. He sat close. He said nothing for a moment. He just sat there, present in the way that mattered. Steve, he said finally, how long? 4 months, Steve said, give or take. 4 months from the day I told him he didn't have to go back to the day I got the call. He shook his head slowly. 4 months of rest after 40 years of that mill, that's what I gave him, 4 months. His jaw was tight, both eyes were wet now. I think about that math all the time, Steve said. 40 years of giving his body to something that didn't deserve it. And 4 months of getting something back. And I keep asking myself, why didn't I make it happen sooner? Why did I wait until I had enough? Why didn't I figure out a way to do it earlier when he could have had more time? He looked at his hands again. I know the answer. I know I was working toward it as fast as I could. I know I didn't have the resources earlier. But knowing the answer doesn't make the math feel right. Stephen looked at him steadily. There's a chair, Steve said. In that house, his chair, the one he used to sit in and watch his programs and drink his coffee, and after he passed, nobody moved it. Nobody sat in it. It's still there in the same spot, facing the same television. He paused. I go back to that house sometimes, and I sit down near that chair, not in it, near it, and I just talk to him. I tell him about what's happening, about the show, about the grandkids he would have loved, about all the things that have happened since he left. And I sit there and I talk to him. Because I'm not done talking to him, I don't think I'll ever be done. He looked up at Stephen. The thing people don't understand about success, Steve said, is that it comes with a specific kind of grief that nobody warns you about. The grief of the people who didn't make it long enough to see what you built. The people who believed in you before you gave them anything to believe in. The people whose faith in you cost them something, cost them patience, cost them sacrifice, cost them years of holding on while you figured it out. And by the time you figure it out, by the time you have something to show them that justifies everything they gave you, some of them are gone. And you have to find a way to live with the gap between what you were able to give them and what they deserved. Stephen was very still. My father deserved decades in that chair, Steve said. He deserved to watch me fail and fail again and succeed again, and he deserved to be there for all of it. He deserved to know his grandchildren. He deserved to see Family Feud and laugh about it and call me afterward and say something ridiculous that I would have remembered forever. He deserved all of that, and I got him 4 months. Stephen looked at him for a long moment. Steve, he said, I want to say something that I hope lands the way I mean it. He paused. The promise you made, you were a child when you made it, you kept it. That is an extraordinary thing. Most people make promises to themselves about what they'll do for the people they love when they finally have enough and they forget, or they get distracted, or the distance between who they are and who they want to be becomes too comfortable to cross. He paused again. You crossed it, you went back, you got him out. You gave him 4 months of rest after 40 years of work. And I guarantee you that those 4 months to Jesse B. Harvey were worth more than most people get in a lifetime. Something broke open in Steve Harvey's face then. Not loudly, Steve Harvey did nothing loudly that wasn't meant to be loud. Quietly, with the particular economy of a large man allowing himself to be small for a moment. He called me son, Steve said. His voice was rough. Every time we talked, didn't matter what the conversation was about, he always started with son, and I haven't heard that word the same way since he left. Nobody else in the world calls me that. Nobody else can. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'd give everything I've built to hear it one more time. Stephen looked at him. His own eyes were not dry. Jesse B. Harvey, Stephen said simply. Say his name. Jesse B. Harvey, Steve said, born in Welch, West Virginia, the strongest man I ever knew, who went to work in the dark for 40 years so I could stand in the light. He paused. And who I got out, even if it wasn't soon enough, even if it wasn't long enough, I got him out. The applause that followed was not the eruption of the opening that had been for Steve Harvey, the entertainer, the host, the phenomenon. This was for the son of Jesse B. Harvey, For the boy who made a promise in a house where a man came home from the mill every night exhausted and uncomplaining. For the man who kept it. For the chair that nobody sits in. That night laughter gave way to grace, and television remembered what it was for.